1937, Savannah. The Thompson Family, the Sunday picnic photograph. The discovery at Bonaventure. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get to the video. Sarah Mitchell had always been drawn to the forgotten corners of Southern history, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover in the humid archives of the Savannah Historical Society. On that sweltering August afternoon, as a professor of American Studies at the University of Georgia, she had come to research Depression-era family life in coastal Georgia. But what she found would challenge everything she thought she knew about the power of photography to capture more than just a moment in time. The photograph was tucked away in a manila folder, labeled simply Thompson Family, Miscellaneous, Ninsuderamreterivis, buried among hundreds of similar family collections that had been donated to the society over the decades. The folder itself showed signs of age and neglect, water stains along the edges, the manila paper yellowed and brittle, and a musty smell that spoke of years spent in less than ideal storage conditions. When Sarah carefully extracted the photograph from its protective tissue paper, she immediately recognized the distinctive characteristics of 1930s amateur photography. The black and white image bore the telltale signs of its era: slightly grainy texture from the silver halide emulsion, soft focus around the edges typical of box cameras, and the characteristic contrast that marked photographs taken with the simple equipment available to middle-class families of the time. The scene depicted was quintessentially American, a Sunday family picnic in what appeared to be a meadow on the outskirts of Savannah. Checkered blankets were spread across the grass. Wicker picnic baskets sat open, revealing glimpses of food within, and the Thompson family was arranged in the casual but deliberate composition that characterized family photographs of the era. The family members themselves seemed to embody the spirit. The father, a man in his 40s, wearing suspenders and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, sat with the relaxed confidence of someone who had weathered the worst of the Depression and was beginning to see better times ahead. The mother, dressed in a simple but neat floral dress, her hair carefully styled in the waves popular during the period, smiled warmly at the camera while keeping one eye on the children. 3 children completed the human portion of the scene. 2 boys, who appeared to be around 8 and 10 years old, wearing knickers and white shirts, their hair slicked down with pomade in the fashion of the time, and a girl of perhaps 6, dressed in a white dress with a large bow in her hair. All 3 children were smiling, their faces reflecting the carefree joy that parents of the era worked so hard to preserve, despite the economic hardships that had defined much of the decade. But it was the dog that immediately captured Sarah's attention and would not let it go. Positioned almost exactly in the center of the photograph, the animal, a medium-sized mixed breed with distinctive markings that suggested some combination of collie and retriever, was staring directly into the camera lens with an intensity that was both compelling and deeply unsettling. Unlike the relaxed, happy expressions of the human family members, the dog's gaze was serious, almost grave. Its eyes seemed to hold a knowledge or awareness that transcended the simpler moment being captured. There was something in that direct stare that suggested the animal was not merely looking at the camera, but through it, as if it could see the viewer who would examine this photograph decades in the future. The technical quality of the photograph was typical for amateur family photography of the 19th era, but there were subtle elements that suggested the photographer had possessed more skill than the average snapshot taker. The composition was well balanced, with the family arranged in a natural but aesthetically pleasing grouping. The exposure was properly calculated to capture detail in both the shadows under the trees and the bright sunlight illuminating the picnic scene. Most importantly, the depth of field had been managed in such a way that every member of the family, including the dog, was in sharp focus, despite the limitations of the equipment likely used. This suggested that whoever had taken the photograph had understood the basics of photography well enough to ensure that this family moment would be preserved with clarity and detail. Sarah examined the back of the photograph, hoping to find additional information about its origins. Written in faded pencil, in the careful script typical of the era, were the words Thompson Family Sunday Picnic, Bonaventure, Meadow, April later. Below this, in what appeared to be a different hand, someone had added, Note, Rex's last photograph. The notation about Rex's last photograph immediately intrigued Sarah. Was Rex the dog in the image? And if so, what had happened to him after this photograph was taken? The date, April 1927, placed the image squarely in the middle of the Depression era, when families were beginning to recover from the worst economic crisis in American history, but were still dealing with uncertainty and hardship. Sarah's initial research into the Thompson family revealed that they had been typical middle-class residents of Savannah during the William Thompson had worked as a clerk for the Central of Georgia Railway, a job that had provided steady, if modest income throughout the Depression. His wife, Margaret, had been active in local church and community organizations, and their 3 children, William Jr., Robert, and Mary, had attended local public schools. The family had lived in a modest 2-story house in Savannah's Victorian district, a neighborhood that had seen better days but was still considered respectable for working-class families. They had owned a car, a 1964, that William had purchased used and had been able to afford small luxuries like Sunday picnics and family photographs, suggesting that they had weathered the economic crisis better than many of their contemporaries. But it was the story of Rex, the family dog, that proved most elusive and most intriguing. Sarah's research through local newspapers, veterinary records, and family documents revealed tantalizing hints about the animal, but no clear narrative about what had made this particular photograph significant enough to warrant a notation about it being Rex's last. The Savannah Morning News from April 1937 contained several references to unusual animal behavior in the weeks leading up to the Thompson family picnic. Reports described the dogs throughout the city acting strangely, refusing to eat, howling at night, and displaying what witnesses described as an uncanny awareness of events that had not yet occurred. One particularly intriguing article, dated April 15, 1937, just 3 days before the Thompson family picnic, described a phenomenon that local residents had begun calling the gnawing look. Dogs throughout Savannah were reportedly staring at their owners with an intensity and awareness that many found disturbing. Veterinarians of the era had no explanation for the behavior, attributing it to changes in barometric pressure or other environmental factors. Sarah found additional evidence of this unusual animal behavior in the diary of Dr. James Morrison, a local veterinarian. His entries from April 9. They display none of the typical signs of illness or distress, but there is an alertness, an intensity in their behavior that I have never observed before. It is as if they are waiting for something, or perhaps warning us about something that is yet to come. The veterinarian's observations were particularly relevant to Sarah's investigation because his records showed that Rex Thompson had been brought to his clinic on April 16, 2007, just 2 days before the family picnic. The examination notes indicated that the dog was in perfect health, but Dr. Morrison had noted the same unusual intensity in Rex's behavior that he had observed in other dogs throughout the city. The animal appears to be in excellent physical condition, the veterinarian had written, but there is something in his demeanor that suggests an awareness beyond normal canine perception. The family reports that he has been staring at them with unusual intensity for the past week, as if he is trying to communicate something of great importance. So Sarah delved deeper into the mystery of the Thompson family photograph. She began to uncover a pattern of strange occurrences that had taken place in Savannah during the spring. The unusual animal behavior was just one element of a larger phenomenon that had captured the attention of local residents and authorities alike. Weather records from the period showed that April 1970, had been marked by unusual atmospheric conditions, sudden changes in barometric pressure, unexpected shifts in wind patterns, and an unusually high number of electrical storms. Some residents have reported strange lights in the sky, while others described feeling an inexplicable sense of unease or anticipation. The combination of these atmospheric anomalies and the widespread reports of unusual animal behavior had created an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty in Savannah. During the weeks leading up to the Thompson family picnic, it was against this backdrop of mysterious occurrences that the family had gathered for their Sunday outing, creating a photograph that would capture not just a moment of family happiness, but also a sense of impending change that none of them could have fully understood. As Sarah prepared to delve deeper into the mystery of Rex's last photograph, she realized that she was investigating more than just a family snapshot. The image had become a window into a specific moment in American history, when the intersection of personal and cosmic forces had created something that transcended ordinary documentation. The dog's intense stare, which had first captured her attention, now seemed to represent something larger, a moment when the boundary between the known and unknown had become permeable, allowing glimpses of mysteries that lay just beyond human perception. Sarah's investigation into the Thompson family's history led her deep into the archives of Savannah's genealogical society, where she discovered that the family's story was far more complex and intriguing than their modest middle-class appearance at the. The Thompsons had been part of Savannah's social fabric for over a century, and their family history was intertwined with some of the most significant events in the city's past. William Thompson, the father in the photograph, had been born in 1895 to a family that had arrived in Savannah during the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. His father, James Thompson, had been a Union Army veteran who had settled in Georgia after the war, drawn by opportunities in the rebuilding railroad industry. The family had faced considerable hostility from local residents who viewed them as carpetbaggers, but they had persevered and gradually established themselves as respected members of the community. The Thompson family's connection to railroads had continued through the generations. William had followed his father into the railway business, starting as a track worker and gradually working his way up to a clerical position with the Central of Georgia Railway. His job had provided the family with stability during the uncertain years of the 1980s, but it had also connected them to the broader network of transportation and communication that linked Savannah to the rest of the country. Margaret Thompson, née Sullivan, had brought her own fascinating history to the family. Born in 1898 to Irish immigrants who had settled in Savannah's working-class neighborhoods, she had been raised in a household where old-world superstitions and folk beliefs coexisted with American pragmatism. Her family had maintained strong connections to Irish traditions, including beliefs about animals' ability to perceive supernatural phenomena. Sarah discovered that Margaret's mother, Bridget Sullivan, had been known in the Irish community as someone who possessed the sight, an ability to perceive events before they occurred. Family letters preserved in the archives revealed that Bridget had often relied on the behavior of animals, particularly dogs, as indicators of future events. This background became particularly relevant when Sarah learned that Margaret had inherited many of her mother's beliefs about animal perception. The three Thompson children, William Jr., Robert, and Mary, had been typical products of Depression-era childhood, growing up in a world where economic uncertainty was balanced by strong family bonds and community connection. School records showed that all three had been good students, active in local churches and community organizations. William Jr. had shown particular aptitude for mathematics and science, while Robert had displayed artistic talents that his teachers had encouraged despite the family's modest means. Mary, the youngest child and only daughter, had been described by her teachers as unusually perceptive and sensitive to the moods and feelings of others. Several school reports noted her particular affinity for animals and her ability to calm distressed pets and wildlife. This sensitivity would prove significant in understanding the events surrounding the 1937 photograph, but it was the story of Rex, the family dog, that provided the most intriguing elements of Sarah's research. Through interviews with the elderly Savannah residents who had known the Thompson family, she learned that Rex had been no ordinary pet. The dog had come to the family under unusual circumstances in the winter of 1935, during one of the coldest periods in Savannah's recorded history. According to family stories preserved in oral tradition, Rex had appeared at the Thompson family's back door during a severe ice storm that had paralyzed the city for 3 days. The animal had been injured and nearly frozen, but there had been something about his appearance that had immediately captured the family's attention. Margaret Thompson had insisted on taking the dog in, despite her husband's initial reluctance to take on the expense of another mouth to feed during the difficult economic times. The dog's recovery had been remarkable, not just in terms of his physical healing, but in the way he had seemed to integrate himself into the family's daily routines. Rex had displayed an unusual intelligence and awareness that had impressed everyone who encountered him. He had learned to respond to complex commands, had shown an uncanny ability to anticipate the family's needs, and had demonstrated what many observers described as an almost human-like understanding of emotions and situations. Local veterinarian Record Sarah discovered showed that Rex had been examined several times during his first year with the Thompson family. Dr. Morrison's notes consistently described the dog as being in excellent health, but he had also noted several unusual characteristics. Rex's eyes, for example, had been described as unusually expressive and intelligent, and his behavior had been noted as more responsive to human emotion than typical for his breed. The veterinarian had also documented Rex's unusual reaction to certain weather patterns. The dog had consistently displayed signs of agitation and alertness in the hours before thunderstorms, earthquakes, or other natural phenomena. Morrison had theorized that Rex might have possessed heightened sensitivity to changes in atmospheric pressure or electromagnetic fields, but he had admitted that the dog's responses went beyond what could be explained by known scientific principles. Sarah's research revealed that Rex had become something of a local celebrity in the Thompson family's neighborhood. Neighbors had frequently commented on the dog's unusual behavior and apparent intelligence. Several residents had reported that Rex seemed to know when visitors were coming long before they arrived, and that he had an uncanny ability to locate lost objects or missing children. One particularly intriguing account came from the diary of Miss Eleanor Hartwell, a neighbor who had lived across the street from the Thompson family. Her entries from 1936 and early 1937 contained numerous references to Rex's unusual behavior and apparent prescient abilities. That Thompson dog continues to amaze and, I must admit, sometimes unnerve the entire neighborhood. Mrs. Hartwell had written in February. Yesterday, he began howling and pacing in their yard a full hour before we received word that Miss Patterson's husband had been injured in an accident at the docks. It was as if the animal knew something terrible had happened before any human in the area was aware of it. The diary entries revealed that Rex's behavior had become increasingly unusual in the weeks leading up to the April 9th. Hartwell had noted that the dog had begun spending long periods staring toward the east in the direction of the Atlantic Ocean, as if he were watching for something that only he could see. The Thompson dog has been acting most peculiarly these past few weeks, she had written on April. He stands in their yard for hours at a time, perfectly still, staring toward the ocean with an intensity that is quite unsettling. Margaret Thompson tells me that he has been doing the same thing inside their house, positioning himself at the eastern windows and maintaining his vigil for hours at a time. Sarah's investigation also revealed that the Thompson family had been aware of Rex's unusual abilities and had come to rely on his behavior as a kind of early warning system for various events. Family letters showed that Margaret Thompson had often mentioned the dog's reactions to her relatives, describing how Rex's behavior had helped the family prepare for storms, avoid dangerous situations, and even make important decisions about daily activities. One letter from Margaret to her sister in Atlanta, dated March 9, 2027, provided particularly revealing insights into the family's relationship with their unusual pet. Rex has been our guardian angel these past 2 years. I know it sounds foolish, but I've learned to trust his instincts more than my own. Sometimes, when he becomes agitated or starts that intense staring of his, I know to pay attention. He's never been wrong about sensing when something important is about to happen. The letter also revealed that Margaret had been concerned about Rex's behavior in the weeks before the picnic. He's been different lately, she had written. More serious, if that makes sense. It's as if he's trying to tell us something, but we can't understand what it is. William thinks, I'm being silly, but I can't shake the feeling that Rex knows something we don't. As Sarah pieces together the Thompson family story, she began to understand that an Indian-tested picnic photograph had captured more than just a moment of family happiness. It had documented a family that had learned to live with and appreciate the mysterious, a household where the boundary between the ordinary and extraordinary had become permeable through the relationship with an unusual animal. The photograph's notation about being Rex's last took on new significance in this context. It suggested that whatever Rex had been sensing in the weeks leading up to the picnic had been related to his own fate, and that the family had somehow been aware that this Sunday outing would mark the end of an era in their lives. Sarah realized that to fully understand the mystery of the Thompson family photograph, she would need to investigate what had happened on April. The answers, she suspected, lay not just in the family's personal history, but in the broader context of events that had been unfolding in Savannah and the wider world during that pivotal spring. Sarah's investigation into the events of April 8, 1937, required her to piece together information from multiple sources, weather records, newspaper accounts, police reports, and personal diaries from Savannah residents. What emerged was a picture of a day that had begun normally but had been marked by a series of unusual occurrences that would give the Thompson family picnic photograph its lasting significance. The morning of April 18th had dawned clear and warm, with temperatures reaching an unseasonably comfortable 78 degrees Fahrenheit by mid. Weather records from the Savannah Weather Bureau showed that atmospheric pressure had been stable, with light winds from the southeast and no indication of the storms that had characterized much of the previous week. It had been, by all meteorological measures, a perfect day for a family picnic. The Thompson family had begun their preparations early, with Margaret packing a traditional Sunday picnic lunch of fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and sweet tea. William had loaded their 1934 Ford with blankets, chairs, and the family's box camera, a Kodak Brownie that had been a Christmas gift from Margaret's sister the previous year. The children had been excited about the outing, as it represented their first family picnic since the previous fall. According to family accounts preserved in letters and diaries, Rex had displayed unusual behavior from the moment the family began preparing for their outing. Unlike his typical enthusiasm for car rides and outdoor activities, the dog had seemed reluctant to leave the house. Margaret Thompson had noted in a letter to her sister that Rex had positioned himself by the front door and had stared at each family member with an intensity that had made her uncomfortable. It was as if he was trying to memorize our faces, Margaret had written. I know that sounds dramatic, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was saying goodbye, even though we were only going for a picnic a few miles from home. The family had driven to Bonaventure Meadow, a popular picnic spot located about 5 miles southeast of Savannah. The meadow was situated on a bluff overlooking the Wilmington River, surrounded by ancient live oaks draped with Spanish moss. It had been a favorite destination for Savannah families since the 1920s, offering scenic views and enough open space for children to play safely. Contemporary accounts from other families who had been at Bonaventure Meadow that day described the Thompson family as appearing happy and relaxed during the early part of their picnic. The children had played games on the grass while William and Margaret had set up their lunch and chatted with other families who had chosen the same location for their Sunday outing. However, several witnesses noted that Rex had behaved differently from other dogs at the meadow that day. While other pets had run and played with typical canine enthusiasm, Rex had remained close to the Thompson family, often sitting perfectly still and staring toward the eastern horizon where the Wilmington River met the Atlantic Ocean. Miss Dorothy Kellerman, whose family had been picnicking nearby, later wrote in her diary about the Thompson dog's unusual behavior. There was something almost human about the way the dog watched the horizon. It would sit perfectly still for long periods, as if he were waiting for something specific to appear. It was quite unsettling, actually. My husband joked that the dog looked like he was expecting a ship to come in, but there was nothing amusing about the intensity of his vision. In the photograph that would become the center of Sarah's investigation had been taken around todo 30 in the theater name, according to the shadows visible in the image and the testimony of other families who had been present. William Thompson Jr., who had been 10 years old at the time, had been interviewed by a local historian in the 1980s and had provided detailed recollections of the moment the photograph was taken. Dad had been trying to get a good picture of the whole family all afternoon, William Jr. had recalled. But every time he set up the camera, Rex would move or look away. Finally, Dad got frustrated and said he was going to take the picture whether Rex cooperated or not. That's when Rex suddenly sat perfectly still and stared right into the camera lens. It was like he had been waiting for that exact moment. The younger William's account was corroborated by his sister Mary, who had been interviewed for the same historical project. Her memories of the photograph session had been particularly vivid. Rex looked so serious in that picture, more serious than I had ever seen him. It was like he knew something we didn't know. When Dad snapped the picture, Rex held that stare for several more seconds, and then he relaxed and went back to his normal behavior. What happened next had been documented in multiple sources and had become part of Savannah folklore. Approximately 3:15 p.m., about 45 minutes after the photograph was taken, witnesses throughout the Bonaventure Meadow area reported seeing a strange phenomenon in the sky above the Wilmington River. The Savannah Morning News had covered the event in its April 19th edition, describing an unusual atmospheric disturbance that had been observed by dozens of witnesses. The newspaper account described a shimmering effect in the air that had appeared above the river, creating what witnesses described as a window or portal that had seemed to show images of distant places and times. Arlo Pemberton, a professor of physics at Armstrong College, now Armstrong Atlantic State University, had been among the witnesses to the phenomenon. His account, published in the college's scientific journal later that year, provided a more detailed description of what had occurred. At approximately 3:15 p.m., a distortion in the atmosphere became visible above the Wilmington River, roughly 2 miles east of Bonaventure Meadow. The distortion appeared as a circular area of approximately 50 feet in diameter, where the air seemed to shimmer and bend light in unusual ways. Through this distortion, observers reported seeing what appeared to be images of other locations, and possibly other times. Pemberton's account noted that the phenomenon had lasted for exactly 11 minutes before gradually fading away. During that time, witnesses had reported seeing a variety of images through the atmospheric distortion: sailing ships that appeared to be from earlier centuries, landscapes that didn't match the local geography, and figures in clothing from different historical periods. Most significantly for Sarah's investigation, Multiple witnesses had reported that dogs throughout the area had reacted to the phenomenon before it became visible to human observers. Rex Thompson and other dogs at the meadow had begun barking and showing signs of agitation approximately 10 minutes before the atmospheric distortion had appeared. Miss Kellerman's diary entry about the event provided additional details about Rex's specific reaction. About 10 minutes before we saw that strange shimmering in the sky, the Thompson dog suddenly stood up and began barking toward the river. It wasn't his normal bark. It was more like a howl, almost mournful. Other dogs in the area began responding to him, and soon there was a chorus of animal sounds that was quite eerie. The phenomenon had attracted the attention of authorities, and police reports from April 18th documented the response of local law enforcement to the numerous calls they had received about the unusual sighting. Officer Patrick O'Brien, who had been dispatched to investigate, had filed a report that corroborated the civilian accounts, responded to multiple reports of unusual atmospheric conditions at Bonaventure Meadow area. Upon arrival, observed approximately 40 civilians, pointing toward disturbance above Wilmington River. Disturbance appeared as circular area where air seemed to move in unusual patterns. Phenomenon lasted approximately 11 minutes before dissipating. No explanation for cause of disturbance. Recommend follow-up with the Weather Bureau. The Weather Bureau's follow-up investigation, conducted over the following week, had found no meteorological explanation for the atmospheric disturbance. Temperature and pressure readings from the day had been normal, and there had been no unusual electromagnetic activity recorded by the region's monitoring stations. What made the event particularly significant for the Thompson family was Rex's behavior in the aftermath of the phenomenon. According to family accounts, the dog had become increasingly agitated as the atmospheric disturbance had faded away. He had begun pacing and whining, and had repeatedly looked back and forth between the family and the eastern horizon. Margaret Thompson's letter to her sister, written 2 days after the picnic, described Rex's distress. Ever since we saw that strange thing in the sky, Rex has been inconsolable. He keeps going to the windows and staring toward the river, and he's barely eaten anything. It's as if he's waiting for something or someone to return. The family had packed up their picnic and returned home shortly after the atmospheric phenomenon had ended. But Rex's unusual behavior had continued throughout the evening and into the following days. Morrison's veterinary records showed the Thompson family had brought Rex to his clinic on April 20th, concerned about the dog's apparent distress and his refusal to eat. The animal appears to be in good physical health, Dr. Morrison then noted, but it displays signs of psychological distress that I have never observed in a canine patient. He seems to be mourning something, though what that might be is beyond my ability to determine. As Sarah pieced together the events of April 18, 1937, she began to understand that the Thompson family picnic had coincided with something far more significant than a simple family outing. The photograph of Rex staring directly into the camera had captured a moment when the dog had somehow been aware of the extraordinary events that were about to unfold. The notation about the photograph being Rex's last was beginning to make sense, though Sarah still needed to discover what had happened to the dog in the days following the picnic. The answer, she suspected, was connected to the mysterious atmospheric phenomenon that had appeared above the Wilmington River and to Rex's apparent ability to perceive events beyond normal canine awareness. The days following the April 18th picnic marked the beginning of a period that the Thompson family would later describe as the most difficult and mysterious of their lives. Sarah's research into this period revealed a story that challenged conventional understanding of animal behavior and raised questions about the nature of perception and reality that had never been satisfactorily answered. Rex's behavior in the immediate aftermath of the atmospheric phenomenon had been documented in multiple sources, including Margaret Thompson's detailed letters to her sister, Morrison's veterinary records, and the observations of neighbors who had become increasingly concerned about the dog's obvious distress. On April 19th, the day after the picnic, Margaret had written to her sister, "Rex has not eaten since we returned from Bonaventure yesterday. He spends all this time at the eastern windows of our house, staring toward the river. When we try to coax him away, he becomes agitated and returns to his vigil within minutes. It's as if he's waiting for something to return, though I cannot imagine what." The letter revealed that Rex's behavior had affected the entire family. The children had been particularly upset by their pet's obvious distress, and William Sr. had become increasingly concerned about the dog's refusal to eat or engage in normal activity. The family had tried everything they could think of to restore Rex's normal behavior, offering his favorite foods, taking him for walks, and even bringing other neighborhood dogs to visit in hopes of stimulating his interest in play. Morrison's veterinary records from this period provided a clinical perspective on Rex's condition. The dog had been examined 3 times between April 20th and April 25th, and each examination had revealed the same puzzling results. Rex was in perfect physical health, but his behavior suggested profound psychological distress. The animal's vital signs are normal, and he shows no evidence of illness or injury, Dr. Morrison had noted on April 12th. However, his behavior is unlike anything I have observed in 30 years of veterinary practice. He appears to be mourning, but for what or whom, I cannot determine. His focus on the eastern horizon is particularly puzzling, as if he expects something to appear from that direction. The veterinarian had consulted with colleagues in Atlanta and Charleston, but none had encountered similar cases. Morrison had theorized that Rex might have been affected by some aspect of the atmospheric phenomenon that had been observed on April 18th, but he had no scientific framework for understanding how such an event might impact animal behavior. Neighbors' accounts from this period painted a picture of a community that had become increasingly concerned about both Rex's condition and its potential implications. Hartwell's diary entries revealed that the unusual behavior had not been limited to Rex alone. Other dogs in the neighborhood had also displayed signs of distress and agitation following the uproar. The entire neighborhood seems to be affected by whatever happened at Bonaventure, Mrs. Hartwell had written on April 2. Dogs throughout the area are acting strangely, though none as severely as the Thompson dog. There's an atmosphere of unease that I cannot explain, as if we're all waiting for something to happen, though none of us knows what that might be. The situation had reached a crisis point on April 26th, when Rex's behavior had suddenly changed in a way that had alarmed everyone who witnessed it. According to multiple accounts, the dog had spent the morning engaged in his usual vigil at the eastern windows, but at approximately 12:30 p.m., exactly 1 week after the photograph had been taken, he had suddenly become alert and focused in a way that suggested he had finally seen what he had been waiting for. Margaret Thompson's letter describing this event, written to her sister the following day, provided a detailed account of what had occurred. At 2:30 yesterday afternoon, Rex suddenly stood up from his position at the window and began barking with an excitement I hadn't seen from him since before the picnic. He ran to the front door and began scratching at it, clearly wanting to go outside. When William opened the door, Rex ran directly toward the river, moving faster than I had ever seen him move. The family had followed Rex as he ran through the neighborhood streets, joined by neighbors who had been alerted by the dog's excited barking. The procession had made its way to the waterfront, where Rex had positioned himself at the end of a pier that extended into the Wilmington River. William Thompson Jr.'s later account of these events, given during his 1980s interview, provided additional details about what had happened at the pier. Rex stood at the very end of the pier, staring out toward the ocean. He was perfectly still, more still than I had ever seen him. And then, suddenly, he just walked into the water, not running or jumping, just walking, as if he were walking on solid ground. Multiple witnesses had confirmed this account. Rex had entered the water calmly and deliberately, swimming steadily toward the east, in the direction of the Atlantic Ocean. Despite the family's calls and the attempts of several men to reach him with boats, Rex had continued swimming until he had disappeared from sight. The search for Rex had continued for 3 days, involving local authorities, volunteer boats, and even a Coast Guard cutter that had been dispatched from the Savannah station. However, no trace of the dog had ever been found. No body had washed ashore, and no evidence of his fate had ever been discovered. The official Coast Guard report filed on April 30th had concluded that the dog had likely drowned and that his body had been carried out to sea by the current. However, the report had also noted several unusual aspects of the incident that had puzzled the investigating officers. The animal's behavior prior to entering the water was unlike typical cases of distressed or disoriented pets, the report had stated. Witnesses consistently described the dog as appearing purposeful and determined rather than confused or frightened. The animal's swimming pattern was also unusual, maintaining a steady eastward course despite strong currents that should have carried him southward. The Coast Guard investigation had also documented several witness reports of unusual phenomena observed during Rex's final swim. Multiple observers had reported seeing what appeared to be a path of light on the water's surface, extending from the pier toward the horizon in the direction Rex had been swimming. However, these reports had been dismissed as optical illusions caused by afternoon sunlight on the waters. Dr. Morrison's final veterinary report on Rex filed after the dog's disappearance had attempted to provide a scientific explanation for the animal's behavior. Based on my observations and the accounts of the family, he believed the dog may have been responding to some form of environmental stimulus that was beyond human perception. The atmospheric phenomenon, observed on April 18th, may have created conditions that affected the animal's sensory apparatus in ways we do not yet understand. The veterinarian also noted that Rex's case had not been unique. He had received reports of similar behavioral changes in dogs throughout the coastal Georgia region following the April 18th phenomenon. However, Rex had been the only animal to disappear in such a dramatic fashion. The impact of Rex's disappearance on the Thompson family had been profound and lasting. Margaret's letters from the months following the incident revealed a family struggling to understand what had happened and to cope with the loss of a pet who had become central to their daily lives. "The house feels empty without Rex," Margaret had written in June reciente. "But more than that, we all feel as if we've lost our connection to something important, something that helped us understand the world around us. Rex was more than just a pet. He was our guide to mysteries we didn't even know existed." The children had been particularly affected by Rex's disappearance. School records showed that all 3 Thompson children had experienced academic and behavioral difficulties in the months following the incident. Teachers had noted that they seemed distracted and anxious, often staring out windows during class as if they were looking for something. Williams had attempted to replace Rex with another dog, but the family had found it impossible to bond with a new pet. The replacement dog, a golden retriever puppy they had named Buddy, had been returned to the breeder after only 2 weeks, when it became clear that the family was not ready for another animal. As Sarah pieced together the story of Rex's disappearance, she began to understand why the April 18th photograph had been annotated as Rex's last. The image had captured the final documented moment of an extraordinary animal who had somehow been connected to mysteries that transcended ordinary understanding. The photograph's power lay not just in its documentation of a family moment, but in its capture of Rex's intense stare, a gaze that now seemed to represent his awareness of the extraordinary events that were about to unfold and his knowledge that his time with the Thompson family was coming to an end. Sarah realized that to fully understand the significance of the Thompson family photograph, she needed to investigate the broader context of the April 18th phenomenon and its connection to other unexplained events that had occurred in the Savannah area. During Sarah's investigation into the atmospheric phenomenon, observed at Bonaventure Meadow on April 11th, what she discovered was a pattern of unusual occurrences that suggested the Thompson family's experience had been part of a much larger and more complex phenomenon. Their research began with the archives of Armstrong College, where Dr. Harold Pemberton's detailed scientific report on the April 8th atmospheric disturbance had been preserved along with his subsequent investigations into similar phenomena. Pemberton had been a respected physicist whose work on electromagnetic fields and atmospheric conditions had earned him recognition in academic circles throughout the Southeast. Pemberton's follow-up research, conducted in the months following the April 8th incident, had revealed that the Bonaventure area had been the site of numerous unexplained phenomena dating back to the early 90s. His compilation of historical accounts, preserved in the college's scientific archives, painted a picture of a location where the boundary between the ordinary and extraordinary seemed unusually permeable. The earliest documented incident occurred in 1893, when a group of plantation workers had reported seeing ships sailing through the air above the Wilmington River. The account, preserved in the diary of plantation owner Jose Atatnal, had described vessels that appeared to be from different historical periods, sailing through the sky in formation before disappearing into what witnesses described as a door in the air. Similar incidents had been reported throughout the 19th century, with enough frequency that the area had gained a reputation among local residents as a place where unusual things happened. The reports had typically involved sightings of anachronistic objects or figures sailing ships in an era of steamboats, Native American warriors long after the local tribes had been displaced, and buildings or landscapes that didn't match the known geography of the region. Pemberton's research had also uncovered evidence that animals had consistently played a role in these phenomena. Historical accounts frequently mentioned unusual animal behavior preceding the sightings, with dogs, horses, and even wild animals displaying signs of agitation or awareness before human witnesses observed anything unusual. One particularly relevant account came from the journal of Dr. Samuel Hopkins, a physician who had practiced in Savannah. Hopkins had documented several cases where patients' pets had displayed behavior similar to Rex Thompson's experience, becoming fixated on the eastern horizon and eventually disappearing in the direction of the Wilmington River. He had observed a pattern among the animals of this region that defies conventional explanation. Dr. Hopkins had written in dogs in particular seemed to possess an awareness of phenomena that remain invisible to human perception. They will stare toward the river for days or weeks, as if waiting for something to appear, and then suddenly depart in that direction, never to be seen again. Hopkins had theorized that the animals were responding to what he called temporal disturbances, disruptions in the normal flow of time, that created windows between different historical periods. While his theory had been dismissed by his contemporaries as unscientific speculation, Pemberton's 1937 research had found compelling evidence to support the physician's observations. Sarah's investigation revealed that the Bonaventure area had geological characteristics that might have contributed to the unusual phenomena. The region sat at the intersection of several underground waterways and was built on a foundation of limestone and quartz deposits that could potentially create unique electromagnetic conditions. Pemberton's geological surveys had identified what he called resonance points throughout the area, locations where the combination of underground water flow, mineral deposits, and electromagnetic fields created conditions that might affect the normal properties of space and time. The spot where the Thompson family had held their picnic had been identified as one of the most significant of these resonance points. The physicist's research had also revealed connections between the Bonaventure phenomena and similar occurrences reported at other locations around the world. He had corresponded with researchers in Scotland, Peru, and Japan, who had documented comparable incidents involving atmospheric disturbances, animal behavior, and apparent temporal anomalies. One particularly intriguing connection had been with Dr. Hamish MacLeod, a Scottish physicist who had been studying similar phenomena in the Highlands. Dr. MacLeod's research had identified locations where what he called thumb streams seemed to intersect, creating opportunities for glimpses into other historical periods. The evidence suggests that certain geographical locations serve as natural focal points for temporal energy. Dr. MacLeod had written to Dr. Pemberton, animals appear to be naturally sensitive to these energies, while humans typically require specific atmospheric conditions to perceive the phenomena. Sarah found that Dr. Pemberton's research had been cut short by his sudden death in 19, just 2 years after the Thompson family incident. The official cause of death had been listed as a heart attack, but colleagues had noted that he had been in good health and had shown no previous signs of cardiac problems. More mysteriously, Pemberton had disappeared for 3 days before his body was found, and he had been discovered at Bonaventure Meadow in almost the exact location where the Thompson family photograph had been taken. The circumstances of Pemberton's death had led to speculation that he had been conducting unauthorized experiments related to the temporal phenomena he had been studying. His research notes from the final months of his life suggested that he had been attempting to predict when the next atmospheric disturbance would occur and had planned to be present to observe it directly. Sarah's investigation into the period following Pemberton's death revealed that interest in the Bonaventure phenomena had continued among a small group of researchers, however, the outbreak of World War II had redirected scientific attention to more immediate concerns, and the study of temporal anomalies had been relegated to the margins of academic research. The war years had also brought changes to the Bonaventure area itself. The meadow where the Thompson family had held their picnic had been requisitioned by the military for use as a training facility, and public access had been restricted. When the area had been returned to civilian use after the war, many of the old landmarks had been altered or destroyed, making it difficult to identify the exact locations where phenomena had been observed. However, Sarah found evidence that unusual incidents had continued to occur in the area throughout the 1930s, though they had received less public attention due to the changed circumstances. Military personnel stationed at the training facility had filed several reports of unexplained sightings, and local residents had continued to report unusual animal behavior in the vicinity of the former meadow. One particularly significant incident had occurred in 1952, when a military training exercise had been disrupted by what witnesses described as an atmosphere. The official military report had classified the incident, but Sarah found references to it in the personal papers of Colonel James Whitfield, who had been the commanding officer of the training facility. At approximately 2 p.m. training exercise was interrupted by appearance of atmospheric disturbance above target area, Colonel Whitfield had noted in his private journal. Disturbance lasted approximately 15 minutes and was observed by multiple personnel. By commanding investigation by appropriate scientific authorities, though doubt such investigation will be authorized, given current security concerns. The colonel's journal had also noted that several military working dogs had displayed unusual behavior before and during the incident, becoming agitated and attempting to move toward the disturbance, despite their handler's commands. One dog had broken free from its handler and had run directly into the atmospheric anomaly, disappearing completely and never being found despite extensive searches. Sarah's research revealed that the pattern of animal disappearances had continued throughout the decades following the Thompson family incident. Local animal control record showed an unusually high number of missing pet reports from the Bonaventure area, with many of the missing animals last seen heading toward the Wilmington River. The most recent documented incident had occurred in 1995, when a family golden retriever named Max had disappeared under circumstances remarkably similar to Rex Thompson's fate. The dog had been displaying unusual behavior for several days, staring toward the east and refusing to eat, before suddenly running to the waterfront and swimming toward the ocean. Like Rex, Max had never been found despite extensive search efforts. As Sarah compiled her research on the Bonaventure phenomena, she began to understand that the Thompson family photograph had documented more than just a family picnic. It had captured a moment when the veil between different realities had been about to lift, and Rex's intense stare had reflected his awareness of the extraordinary events that were approaching. The photograph had become a historical document of a phenomenon that challenged conventional understanding of time, space, and animal perception. Rex's fate had been part of a pattern that stretched back over a century, suggesting that certain animals possessed abilities that allowed them to perceive and respond to forces beyond human comprehension. Sarah realized that the final chapter of her investigation would need to address the broader implications of what she had discovered and consider what the Thompson family photograph might reveal about the nature of reality itself. As Sarah compiled her research into the Thompson family photograph and the Bonaventure phenomena, she realized that her investigation had uncovered something far more significant than a simple family mystery. The evidence she had gathered suggested the existence of natural forces and animal capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of time, space, and consciousness. Their final research phase focused on connecting the Thompson family's experience to broader patterns of unexplained phenomena and animal behavior that had been documented throughout history. What emerged was a picture of a world where certain animals served as sentinels or bridges between different realities, possessing abilities that science was only beginning to acknowledge. Sarah's correspondence with contemporary researchers in the fields of animal cognition and quantum physics revealed that modern science was beginning to develop frameworks that might explain the phenomena she had documented. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist at MIT, had been particularly interested in Sarah's findings and their potential implications for understanding the nature of time and consciousness. What you've documented aligns with emerging theories about quantum entanglement and the possibility that consciousness might exist independently of traditional space-time constraints, Dr. Vasquez had written in response to Sarah's research summary. Animals, with their different neurological structures and sensory capabilities, might be naturally attuned to quantum phenomena that humans can only perceive under specific conditions. Vasquez had also pointed out that recent research in animal cognition had revealed capabilities that previous generations of scientists had dismissed as impossible. Studies of animal navigation, for example, had shown that many species possessed magnetic and electromagnetic sensitivities that allowed them to perceive information about their environment that was completely beyond human awareness. The idea that some animals might be sensitive to temporal disturbances is not as far-fetched as it might have seemed to researchers. We now know that animals can perceive magnetic fields, infrasound, and other environmental factors that are invisible to human senses. It's possible that they can also perceive temporal anomalies or dimensional boundaries that we're only beginning to understand. Sarah's investigation had also revealed that the Thompson family's experience had not been unique, even within their own historical period. Her research into Depression-era newspapers and personal accounts had uncovered similar incidents throughout the American South, suggesting that the 1920s had been a period of unusual activity for temporal phenomena. One particularly striking parallel had been found in the archives of the New Orleans Historical Society, where Sarah discovered the account of the Boudreaux family's experience in Louisiana. Like the Thompsons, the Boudreaux had owned a dog that had displayed unusual prescient abilities and had eventually disappeared under mysterious circumstances after demonstrating awareness of an atmospheric phenomenon that had been observed by multiple witnesses. The Boudreaux family's dog, a mixed breed named Beauregard, had vanished during what witnesses described as a time storm that had appeared over Lake Pontchartrain. The incident had been documented by local newspapers and had attracted the attention of researchers from Tulane University, but the investigation had been cut short by the outbreak of World War. Similar incidents had been documented in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida during the same period, suggesting that the entire southeastern United States had experienced a wave of temporal anomalies during. The pattern had been consistent: unusual animal behavior, atmospheric disturbances, and the disappearance of animals that had seemed to possess extraordinary awareness of the phenomena. Sarah's research had also revealed that indigenous peoples throughout the region had long traditions and legends that described similar phenomena. The Creek and Cherokee tribes that had originally inhabited the Georgia coast had stories about spirit dogs that served as guides between the world of the living and the realm of ancestors. These stories described animals that would appear during times of transition or crisis, helping to guide souls between different states of existence. Elder Mary Crow Feather, a Cherokee historian whom Sarah had interviewed, had provided particularly valuable insights into the traditional understanding of these phenomena. Our people always knew that some animals could see things that humans couldn't see. Dogs especially were considered sacred because they could walk between worlds. When a dog stared into the distance like that, we knew it was seeing something important, something that would affect the whole community. The elder had also explained that traditional Cherokee beliefs held that certain locations were thin places where the boundaries between different realities were more permeable. The description of these thin places matched remarkably well with the geographical characteristics that Pemberton had identified at Bonaventure Meadow. The old people would say that at these places, time moved differently. Mary Crow Feather had explained. Animals could sense when the boundaries were about to open, and some of them would choose to cross over to the other side. It wasn't death as white people understand it. It was a journey to a different kind of existence. This traditional perspective had provided Sarah with a new framework for understanding Rex Thompson's fate and the fate of other animals that had disappeared under similar circumstances. Rather than viewing these disappearances as tragedies or mysteries, indigenous traditions suggested they might represent a form of spiritual evolution or transition. Sarah's investigation had also revealed that the Thompson family photograph had become part of a larger collection of images that documented similar phenomena. Through her research network, she had discovered that collectors and researchers around the world had been gathering photographs, documents, and artifacts related to temporal anomalies and animal disappearances. Marcus Holloway, a British researcher who had been studying similar phenomena in the United Kingdom, had assembled what he called the Sentinel Archive, a collection of materials documenting cases where animals had displayed apparent awareness of supernatural or temporal events. The Thompson family photograph had been identified as one of the most significant pieces in this informal archive. What makes the Thompson photographs so important is not just that it documents the animal's awareness of the approaching phenomenon. Holloway had explained during a video conference with Sarah, but that it captures the exact moment when the animal was preparing to fulfill its role as a sentinel or guide. The intensity of the dog's stare suggests that it was not just observing something, but actively participating in it. Holloway's research had revealed that similar photographs existed from other locations and time periods, creating a visual record of animals that had served as bridges between different realities. The collection included images from Scotland, Ireland, Peru, and Japan, all showing animals with the same intense, knowing expression that characterized Rex Thompson's gaze in the. As Sarah prepared to conclude her investigation, she reflected on the broader implications of what she had discovered. The Thompson family photograph had served as a window into a world where the boundaries between science and spirituality, between the known and unknown, were far more fluid than conventional understanding suggested. The image had documented not just a family picnic, but a moment when the veil between different realities had been about to lift, and when an extraordinary animal had prepared to fulfill a destiny that transcended ordinary existence. Rex's intense stare had captured his awareness of forces and possibilities that lay beyond human perception, making the photograph a testament to the mysteries that continued to exist at the edges of human understanding. Sarah's research had also revealed that the Thompson family's experience had been part of a larger pattern of phenomena that continued to occur in the modern era. Reports of unusual animal behavior, atmospheric anomalies, and unexplained disappearances continued to be documented around the world, suggesting that the forces Rex had perceived in 19. The photograph's notation as Rex's last had proven to be accurate in ways that the